There is a breathing technique that reduces physiological stress faster than any other intervention currently documented in the research literature. Not faster than some interventions, faster than all of them tested in controlled comparison, including mindfulness meditation, the technique that an $800 million app industry has built its business model around. It takes 60 seconds. It requires no app, no subscription, no guided audio, no special environment, and no prior experience. It can be performed in a meeting, in a car, at a desk, or in any situation where stress is present and other interventions are impossible. The technique is called the physiological sigh, and the research behind it, including a landmark 2023 study from Stanford University, establishes it as the fastest available method for downregulating the acute stress response through voluntary action. The stress management industry generates approximately $800 million per year in the United States through apps, courses, programs, and products designed to help people manage anxiety and stress. Calm and Headspace alone have collectively generated over $1 billion in revenue and maintain subscriber bases in the tens of millions. The subscriptions run $50 to $70 per year. The physiological sigh is free. It has been used by the human body involuntarily since before our species had language. And when performed deliberately, it produces faster cortisol reduction and faster subjective stress relief than the guided meditation those subscriptions are selling. This is the story of what the physiological sigh is, why it works, what the research shows, and why 60 seconds of specific breathing has remained outside mainstream awareness, while a billion-dollar industry has grown up around slower, more complex, and less effective alternatives. To understand why the physiological sigh works so rapidly, you need to understand the specific physiological problem it solves, and why other breathing techniques, while beneficial, do not solve it as fast. When you experience stress or anxiety, the sympathetic nervous system activates. Adrenaline and cortisol release. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes faster and shallower. Blood flow shifts toward the muscles and away from the digestive system. The body prepares for threat response. The fastest way to reverse this state through voluntary action is to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the biological counterpart to the sympathetic that governs rest, recovery, and downregulation. The primary voluntary lever for parasympathetic activation is the breath, specifically the exhalation. As discussed in the context of breathing and vagal tone, slow exhalation stimulates the vagus nerve, which is the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system. Longer exhalations relative to inhalations shift the autonomic balance toward parasympathetic dominance. This is why slow breathing techniques, box breathing, 4-7-8 breathing, 5-5 breathing, all produce relaxation responses. They extend the exhalation relative to baseline. The physiological sigh does something more specific. It addresses a particular physiological state that develops during stress and that standard slow breathing does not fully resolve. During stress, breathing becomes rapid and shallow. Shallow breathing uses primarily the upper portion of the lung volume. The small air sacs deep in the lungs, the alveoli, where gas exchange actually occurs, begin to collapse slightly when they are not fully inflated with each breath. Collapsed alveoli cannot exchange oxygen efficiently. Carbon dioxide accumulates in the blood. The brain detects elevated carbon dioxide as a distress signal and escalates the stress response rather than reducing it. This is a self-reinforcing cycle. Stress causes shallow breathing. Shallow breathing causes alveolar collapse and CO2 accumulation. CO2 accumulation intensifies the physiological stress signal. The stress response deepens. The physiological sigh breaks this cycle directly. The physiological sigh is a double inhalation, a full breath in through the nose, followed immediately by a second short inhalation through the nose before any exhalation, followed by a long, slow, complete exhalation through the mouth. The second inhalation is not a gasp. It is a short additional breath taken immediately after the first inhalation reaches its natural peak, inflating the lungs slightly beyond their normal maximum volume for a single breath. This additional volume is the mechanism. The extra air volume on the second inhale re-inflates the collapsed alveoli. The alveoli that were compressing during shallow stress breathing are fully expanded by the extended inhalation. gas exchange resumes normally. Carbon dioxide begins to clear from the blood. The extended exhalation, longer than both inhalations combined, produces sustained vagal stimulation through the mechanism described earlier. Heart rate slows, sympathetic tone decreases, parasympathetic activation increases. The combination of these two effects, alveolar reinflation, clearing the CO2 signal that was escalating the stress response, and extended exhalation, activating the parasympathetic system, produces a faster and more complete physiological shift than either mechanism alone. This is why the physiological sigh outperforms standard slow breathing techniques in controlled comparison. Standard slow breathing addresses the vagal activation component, but not the alveolar collapse and CO2 accumulation component. The physiological sigh addresses both simultaneously. The 2023 Stanford study that established the comparative superiority of the physiological sigh deserves specific examination because its methodology and findings are more significant than most people have seen reported. The study, published in Cell Reports Medicine by Andrew Huberman's laboratory at Stanford, enrolled over 100 participants and compared 5 different stress management interventions over a 4-week period. The interventions were cyclic physiological sighing, box breathing, cyclic hyperventilation with retention similar to the Wim Hof method, mindfulness meditation, and a control condition. All participants practiced their assigned technique for 5 minutes daily. Stress, anxiety, mood, sleep quality, and physiological measures, including heart rate and respiratory rate, were tracked daily throughout the 4-week period. The results were specific and significant. Cyclic physiological sighing produced the largest improvements in positive affect, mood, and the greatest reductions in anxiety and physiological arousal of any technique tested, including mindfulness meditation. Sleep quality improvements in the physiological sigh group were also greater than in the meditation group. This is not a small finding. Mindfulness meditation has an extensive evidence base, decades of research support, and clinical application in programs, including mindfulness-based stress reduction, that are used in hospitals and mental health settings worldwide. The finding that a specific breathing technique practiced for 5 minutes daily outperformed it on primary outcome measures of stress and anxiety is significant. The researchers noted that the physiological sigh group also showed the fastest improvements. Benefits were detectable within the first week rather than requiring the extended practice periods associated with meditation outcomes. The involuntary physiological sigh is not a technique invented by researchers. It is a behavior the human body performs automatically and constantly, approximately every 5 minutes during waking hours and more frequently during sleep. When you notice someone sighing involuntarily, the long automatic double inhale and exhale that most people associate with fatigue or sadness, you are observing the body's built-in mechanism for clearing collapsed alveoli and resetting respiratory function. It is a maintenance behavior that the brainstem generates without any conscious input, specifically to prevent the alveolar collapse and CO2 accumulation that would otherwise develop from sustained shallow breathing. The insight of the physiological sigh as a deliberate technique is that this automatic brainstem behavior can be consciously invoked at will, and that invoking it deliberately, with an intentionally extended exhalation, produces a stronger and faster stress reduction effect than waiting for the body to generate it automatically. This is available to every person who can breathe. It does not require years of meditation practice. It does not require learning to observe thoughts without judgment or developing equanimity toward discomfort. It is a specific physical action that produces a specific physiological result through documented mechanisms. The comparison to the meditation app industry is worth making explicit because the commercial structure of that industry has been remarkably successful at positioning meditation as the default recommendation for stress management, despite the existence of faster and simpler alternatives. Calm was valued at $2 billion in 2020. Headspace has raised over $215 million in venture funding. Both companies have built their business models around subscription revenue from users who access guided meditation content through mobile apps. The meditation content these apps provide is genuinely useful. The research on mindfulness meditation for stress reduction, anxiety management, and emotional regulation is substantial and credible. Meditation works. The question is not whether it works, but whether it is the optimal first-line recommendation for someone experiencing acute stress who needs fast relief. For acute stress management, the in-the-moment situation where a meeting is in 5 minutes, or a difficult conversation just occurred, or anxiety is escalating in real time, the physiological sigh produces results in 60 seconds. A guided meditation requires a quiet environment, closed eyes, and 5 to 20 minutes of practice. The two interventions are not competing on the same terms. For the longer-term cultivation of stress resilience, emotional regulation capacity, and the attentional training that meditation produces, meditation has genuine advantages that breathing techniques do not fully replicate. The research is clear that regular meditation practice produces structural changes in the brain associated with improved emotional regulation over time. But the app industry markets meditation primarily as a solution to acute stress, the immediate feeling of being overwhelmed, anxious, or unable to calm down. In that specific application, the physiological sigh is faster, simpler, and according to the Stanford research, more effective. The subscription model of the app industry requires daily engagement. A technique that works in 60 seconds without an app does not support a subscription revenue model. This is the structural reason why the physiological sigh is not the centerpiece of an $800 million industry. It cannot be. Here is the complete practical protocol. The physiological sigh is performed in 3 steps. First inhalation, breathe in fully through the nose, filling the lungs to their normal, comfortable maximum. Second inhalation, immediately, without exhaling, take a short additional sniff through the nose. This does not need to be large. Its purpose is to push a small additional volume of air into the lungs beyond the first inhale, reinflating any alveoli that have compressed during stress breathing. The lungs will be at slightly more than their normal maximum volume. Exhalation. Release the breath slowly and completely through the mouth. The exhalation should be longer than both inhalations combined. Allow it to be complete, pushing the last of the air out at the end. This constitutes one physiological sigh. For acute stress management, 1 to 3 repetitions are typically sufficient to produce a noticeable physiological shift. The effect is not subtle when the technique is performed correctly. Most people notice a distinct reduction in heart rate and muscle tension within the first exhalation. For daily stress maintenance, the protocol used in the Stanford study, 5 minutes of cyclic physiological sighing practiced daily, produces cumulative benefits in mood, anxiety reduction, and sleep quality that exceed those of equivalent daily meditation practice, according to the study results. The technique can be performed in any posture, in any environment, with or without eyes closed, during other activities that do not require speech. It is invisible to observers. The second inhalation through the nose is not externally dramatic. It can be performed in a meeting, at a traffic light, before a difficult conversation, or in any situation where other stress management approaches are impractical. Here is the synthesis. The acute stress response produces shallow breathing, alveolar collapse, CO2 accumulation, and escalating physiological distress. The physiological sigh addresses all of these simultaneously, reinflating alveoli through the double inhale and activating the parasympathetic system through the extended exhale. The 2023 Stanford study found it outperforms mindfulness meditation, box breathing, and cyclic hyperventilation on measures of mood, anxiety, and physiological arousal over a 4-week comparison. It takes 60 seconds. It is free. It requires no app, no subscription, no quiet room, no prior training, and no ongoing commitment. The $800 million stress management app industry has built its business model on a technique that takes 5 to 20 minutes, requires a quiet environment, and takes weeks to months to produce reliable benefits. Those benefits are real. The question is whether the business model has created an information environment in which a faster, simpler, and according to comparative research, more effective technique has remained outside mainstream awareness because it cannot support a subscription revenue model. The physiological sigh cannot be sold. It can only be explained, and once you understand it, you cannot unknow it. If this changed how you think about reaching for the Calm app the next time anxiety spikes, hit the like button, share it with someone who pays $70 a year for a meditation app they use twice a week, and subscribe for more of what the industry prefers you never find out.